Tonight, world leaders and World War II veterans mark 80 years since D-Day. Speaking just steps from where Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, President Biden warns against threats to democracy.
To bow down to dictators is simply unthinkable.
Plus, we hear from the greatest generation.
What were you fighting for?
Freedom.
The CBS Evening News starts now. "80 years later, the world remembers the soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force. Good evening, I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank you for being with us. The sun rose over Normandy's cliffs this morning, just as it did on June 6, 1944, as the liberation of Western Europe began with the largest amphibious invasion in history. President Biden joined other world leaders to honor the bravery and sacrifice of the D-Day heroes. He drew a straight line from the fight for freedom in World War II to the fight against Russia's aggression now, saying freedom is worth it, democracy is worth it, the world is worth it. CBS Mornings anchor Tony DeCopel is at the American Cemetery in Normandy. Good evening, Tony.
Good evening, Nora. You know, with all World War II veterans now in their upper 90s or more, today is likely the final time that these shores will greet those veterans for a major anniversary. But if it is the last, it was also one of the biggest.
80 years after the Allied invasion of Hitler's fortress Europe, President Biden and French President Emmanuel Macron gathered to honor the thousands who died and the free world they died for.
De la Légion d'honneur.
With Macron pinning medals on American veterans to induct them into the highest French Order of Merit, the Legion of Honor. And as war rages again on Europe's doorstep after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, President Biden linked the battle for freedom across decades.
Every generation must preserve it, defend it, and fight for it. In memory of those who fought here, died here, literally saved the world here. Let us be worthy of their sacrifice.
A sentiment shared by Secretary Antony Blinken.
One country can't simply violate the territory of another by force, try to dominate its future. If we don't stand up for those rules in our time, then we risk seeing what happened in the time that we're commemorating today.
With the soldiers of World War II now at the far end of life's journey, only about 200 American veterans made the trip to Normandy this year. Among them, Onofrio Zakari, one of the thousands of young Americans who landed at Omaha Beach, then just 21 years old. Now, at 101, he is among the dwindling few still around to tell the story.
The shells were landing all over us. One caught me in my knee and another caught me in my shoulder. I looked over, and there's this GI. He was sitting on his helmet, and he was holding his guts. He was a redhead. Never forget it.
Where did you take cover?
Didn't.
No cover.
No, we just crawled along the beach. Whenever there was a little lull, we got up and ran.
At the American Cemetery here in Normandy, 9,388 soldiers rest under white crosses and stars of David. The pride of our nation, as President Roosevelt put it back then, honored once again by their nation today.
And you were there to help start that cemetery. What did that mean to you?
They were not coming home. Not coming home. I'm lucky to be alive.
And Tony is back with us. Tony, I understand the president's got an important speech tomorrow, again, talking about democracy and freedom. What can you tell us?
Yeah, Nora, he'll be just up the shore from here at Point de Hawk, a cliff where Army Rangers on D-Day fought up the sheer side as enemy fire rained down on them. And though they suffered heavy casualties, they eventually took the cliff in an act of courage in defense of democracy. And an example, the White House is expected to argue, of the risks of ignoring bullies abroad.
Tony DeCopel, thank you. 11 people were hospitalized for heat exhaustion today after they were rescued in a human smuggling bust in San Antonio. The city is under a heat dome with temperatures spiking into the triple digits, and the migrants were found in a trailer with no air conditioning and no access to water. CBS's Ben Tracy reports.
This is the fault of the bloodthirsty organizations that are bringing these people across and putting them in harm's way.
Police say they began following a truck pulling a trailer on the Texas side of the border near Laredo. Underneath, they say they found 26 human smuggling victims.
These people were just laying down in there, exposed to the elements.
In Bexar County, where the heat index soared to 106 degrees today, the alleged smuggling victims were brought to a wooden shack.
It's miserable conditions there, and it's just blazing hot in there.
As the heat dome expands, in Phoenix, Arizona, an expected high of 113 degrees could break the daily record.
We're going to use this rapid cooling bag.
First responders there demonstrated a potentially life-saving way to treat patients suffering from heat stroke. This cooling bag filled with ice could quickly reduce a person's body temperature.
So that's our goal, is to increase the survivability by the time we get them through the doors of the hospital.
And in Las Vegas, road crews laying asphalt braved triple-digit heat.
Yeah, we're about 10 degrees hotter right now. This is more like July weather.
Now, it is expected to cool off by a couple of degrees across much of the West, including here in Las Vegas this coming weekend. But Nora, that extreme heat is back in the forecast for next week.
Very dangerous. Ben Tracy, thank you. People in 5 states are cleaning up tonight after an outbreak of suspected tornadoes, some of which came as a surprise. Just look at this monstrous supercell spinning towards homes in Maryland. And then in Michigan, a tree crashed through a home, killing a toddler and critically injuring his mom. And a suspected tornado just outside D.C. injured several people. President Biden is speaking out tonight about whether or not he would pardon his son in his federal gun case, as the jury heard from the government's key witness, the president's own daughter-in-law, Hallie Biden. CBS' Scott McFarland was inside the courtroom as she testified about Hunter Biden's drug use and the gun at the center of the case.
A star witness in a potentially pivotal piece of video evidence at the trial of President Biden's son Hunter. Hallie Biden, the widow of Hunter's brother Beau, testified this surveillance video shows her throwing away her brother-in-law's gun in a Delaware grocery store parking lot on October 23, 2018. Just 11 days after Hunter Biden bought the gun, and just after Hallie Biden said she found it in Hunter Biden's car along with drug residue and drug paraphernalia. Hallie testified, "I didn't want him to hurt himself or the kids to find it and hurt themselves. I was panicking." Prosecutors are trying to prove Hunter Biden was addicted or using drugs at the time he bought the gun, lying on this federal gun application.
Prosecutors will tell you the physical evidence doesn't lie. And this is about as powerful physical evidence as you can get, linking his possession of that gun to his use of illegal drugs.
Hallie Biden also described taking up a romantic relationship with her brother-in-law about a year after her late husband, Beau Biden's 2015 death, telling the jury it was also Hunter Biden who introduced her to using crack cocaine, calling her drug use a terrible experience. "I'm embarrassed and ashamed." Prosecutors showed Hallie Biden the gun and images of the satchel in which she found and discarded it. But Hunter Biden's attorney, Abby Lowell, tried to show Hallie Biden didn't actually know what Hunter was doing the week he bought the gun. "You don't know if he was drinking, using, or either of the above?" Lowell asked. "I don't know," she responded. Hunter Biden faces the prospect of prison time if convicted on these charges. In an interview today, President Biden ruled out a future pardon for his son. Nora?
Scott McFarland, thank you. One of Donald Trump's most outspoken allies, Steve Bannon, was ordered by a federal judge to report to prison by July 1st to serve a 4-month sentence. Bannon was found to be in contempt of Congress in 2022 after failing to appear for a deposition ordered by the House January 6 committee and refusing to turn over documents. Bannon says he'll fight to appeal his conviction all the way to the Supreme Court. Bannon's former boss, Donald Trump, is in battleground Arizona tonight, firing up supporters at his first campaign event since he was convicted in the hush money case. CBS's Caitlin Huey-Burns is in Phoenix.
Donald Trump today took aim at immigration in the battleground border state, key to his chances of winning the presidency.
Joe Biden wants an invasion. I want a deportation.
CBS News polling shows Trump leading Biden here, with immigration among the top issues of concern.
They assume that because we're immigrants, we are for criminality and for open borders. No, we have families. We believe in America, in a safe border.
Just this week, state Republicans approved a November ballot measure that would allow local police to arrest undocumented migrants crossing the border, a measure aimed at driving voter turnout.
My workforce is largely an immigrant workforce, and they're not criminals.
Citrus farmer Selwyn Justice says he's worried that policy could hurt business.
Somebody might just show up and come into your place of business and tell everybody they need to stop working and demonstrate documentation.
Trump lost Arizona by about 10,000 votes 4 years ago, and it has been ground zero for false claims about the election. Just last month, Trump was named an unindicted co-conspirator in an election interference case where several of his allies were charged. And as for his own conviction, Trump this week pledged retribution.
When this election is over, based on what they've done, I would have every right to go after them.
And the race to be Trump's running mate is also heating up. Several contenders have already received official vetting documents. And some of those top prospects include Governor Doug Burgum, along with Senators Tim Scott, Marco Rubio, and J.D. Vance, who was traveling with Trump here in Arizona today. Nora?
Now look at tonight's other top stories. Dozens of people, including women and children, were killed in an Israeli airstrike today on a UN school complex in central Gaza. CBS's Chris Livesay is in Tel Aviv.
Israel Defense Forces say they were targeting a compound that was housing fighters from both Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. That compound, they said, was inside a UN school where thousands of civilians were sheltering. Israel insists it was a precision airstrike that took days of planning to avoid the loss of innocent life. In the chaotic aftermath in a hospital in Gaza, Nora, CBS News was shown children among those wounded and killed. Why is this happening to us, says this woman. May Allah avenge us.
New murder charges today for the suspected Gilgo Beach serial killer, now accused of killing 6 people on New York's Long Island, some of the murders dating back decades. CBS New York's Carolyn Gussoff was in the courtroom today as new evidence was revealed.
Rex Heuermann showed no emotion in court today, Nora, as the new charges were unveiled. Prosecutors say they connected the 60-year-old architect to the deaths of Jessica Taylor in 2003 and Sandra Castillo in 1993, partially through DNA from hair. They also described a chilling document they called a manifesto found on Heuermann's computer.
It was utilized by Heuermann to methodically blueprint and plan out his kills.
Heuermann has pleaded not guilty to all charges.
And we're getting the results of new crash tests for 3 of the nation's top-selling large SUVs. All had room to improve, but the Ford Expedition and the Chevy Tahoe earned low marks in several key safety categories, including crash protection. CBS's Chris Van Cleve explains the findings.
Nora, it was a big win for the Jeep Wagoneer in the latest round of Insurance Institute for Highway Safety testing. It scored the top safety pick ranking. The Chevrolet Tahoe and Ford Expedition underperformed in a front crash test more than 90% of new vehicles have scored well on since 2021. And in new tests focused on crash protections for rear seat passengers, IIHS found all 3 showed a risk of chest injuries in a collision.
When manufacturers do not perform well in these tests, they quickly pull their engineering and design teams together, make the changes.
Ford and General Motors say they are confident in the safety of their vehicles.
Good information thanks to our CBS News teams across the globe. Eye on America is next with students and their schools' crumbling infrastructure. The average public school building in the U.S. is now nearly half a century old, which means a lot of communities are facing a lot of repairs. Congress passed a $1 trillion infrastructure package, but as CBS's Mark Strassman shows us in tonight's Eye on America, that hasn't meant instant or even timely relief for schools needing work.
So what do we got here?
Right here, look at the top. The ceiling tiles right here are falling down.
Baker Heights Elementary is falling apart.
Down here, this is a water fountain that is in use.
Timothy Scott's job, save the school day, somehow patch whatever's broken.
Could you just fix this?
Well, it could be fixed, it could be repaired, but we're pulling funding from the classroom.
Outside Baton Rouge, Baker, Louisiana is home to roughly 12,000 people. money is tight. The population and tax base are shrinking. The infrastructure's crumbling. All 5 school buildings were built in the 1950s.
Typically, when you have declining enrollment, it's tough to do anything.
Superintendent J.T. Stroder met us at one of Baker's 2 shuttered schools.
Our school infrastructure is reflective of community infrastructure as a whole.
Yes, I think they are. You can drive around the community and you'll see how those kind of match. The way a student feels about their surroundings and their atmosphere affects how they perform on academically.
America's infrastructure grades are in, and the grades are bad. Overall, America's infrastructure, from roads and bridges to drinking water, get a grade of C-. And the needed investment to bring America's schools up to par, $870 billion. So where are we going?
Going down to the Wendy's.
Mayor Darnell Waits showed us Baker's challenges.
Everything that I do is infrastructure.
You know what the problems are. Why don't you just fix them?
It takes money. And there's a lot of other things that's going on at the same time. You want infrastructure, but you want to be safe. So 50% of my budget is public safety, and everything else goes toward infrastructure.
Where's that money going to come from?
Well, you build your revenue, but basically it comes from state government and federal funding.
In 2021, Congress allocated more than $1 trillion to rebuild America's infrastructure. Louisiana Republican Senator Bill Cassidy was instrumental in negotiating that deal.
If you're talking about communities that are in genuine need of significant infrastructure help, if these communities are complaining that the federal government has not stepped up, how would you respond?
During the COVID epidemic, billions were sent to state and local educational authorities. But oftentimes when the federal government puts up dollars, the state and local pull back, and the net sum remains constant.
To date, the infrastructure law has funded more than 40,000 projects across the country. But in many cases, the money reaches communities like Baker too slowly. In 2016, a flood closed the high school, and ever since, students have had classes in the middle school building.
I would say I do feel forgotten about. Kind of ashamed, say what school you go to.
I feel mostly left out at the opportunity to be something bigger.
The water-damaged high school will reopen this fall, 8 years later.
We don't have that experience, like a bigger environment for us to grow in and flourish in, but I'm hopeful for the future.
In many American communities, that's something else America has been slow to rebuild: hope. For Eye on America, Mark Strassman, Baker, Louisiana.
Our kids are our future. We've got to fix these problems. All right, it's history in space as Boeing's Starliner completes its maiden voyage to the International Space Station. That's next. Boeing's Starliner spacecraft successfully docked at the International Space Station today on its inaugural journey carrying 2 NASA astronauts. The astronauts will now spend about a week at the space station before returning to Earth. Heart of America is next with a World War II veteran and a love story for the ages.
This portion of the CBS Evening News is sponsored by Freshpet. It's not dog food, it's food food.
Finally, tonight's Heart of America with a special love story. 100-year-old World War II veteran Harold Terrens and 96-year-old Jean Swerlin are getting married this week in France at a chapel near where U.S. forces landed on D-Day. Terrens arrived days after Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, where he helped ferry captured German soldiers back to England. The New York City natives both lived a full life before meeting 3 years ago in Boca Raton, Florida. They say they keep each other young dancing to their favorite music and holding hands like teenagers.
Being in love is not just for the young.
I'm getting married because I love this girl. She is one of the most magnificent women.
Oh, lovebirds, Harold Terrens and Jean Swerlin. They're tonight's Heart of America. Good story, right? Well, that's tonight's CBS Evening News. I'm Norah O'Donnell. Good night.